Obviously, the age of affluence is characterized by wealth becoming more widespread.
Once you build up a certain amount of money and a certain amount of land, all the rest of it, out of that comes the possibility of entering the ranks of the nobility, of the aristocracy.
This stage can be both the height of a culture and a seed of decline.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely touches on what we've just been talking about, because
it loses
we
touch,
can talk about all these
touch with reality. This is when decadence sets in, when there's a kind of gnawing sense of uncertainty about who you are as a people.
The problem of late stage empire is they just need to touch grass.
Yeah, basically. That's the kind of image of decadence, is the sort of rootlessness, the lack of experience, the lack of putting in the graft in life to get you to where you, and just jumping over and then going, oh, what do I do? I don't know, because I've not sort of put the work in, and that's where.
Yeah. So next stage we'll move on to is the age of affluence. So obviously we've had the stages of, conquest, establishing more stability, and then we reach kind of what could be considered the beginning of the peak of an empire, in this cycle at least. So obviously the age of affluence is characterized by wealth becoming more widespread, although it must be caveated that the wealth being more widespread doesn't mean that everyone is rich.
No,
it means that those influential groups that we were talking about
are able to rise all around.
Well, yeah, by and large.
By and large, I mean, there's always going to be
obviously those influential groups that we were talking about
who don't enjoy those benefits, but
yeah, but also the other key thing is that those influential groups that we were saying, were starting to become more prominent in society, are obviously hoarding the wealth for themselves a lot of the time as well. So
for sure.
There is an increase in wealth from either conquests or
and we'll get on to
inventions,
decadence.
new developments.
Yeah, we'll get on to decadence later, but one thinks of, especially in the French, especially in the not the empire, because it's pre-Napoleon, but under the kings, France under the kings, and Russia as well under the Tsars. That sort of
pretty much every European empire of any kind,
where the wealth is just hoarded at the top, and it's expressing itself in like the Palace of Versailles and Marie Antoinette.
Well, even in the Roman Empire, you look at there's like a very distinct two-class system, because you have the patrician class, which is your upper class, and then you have the plebeians, which is where the word pleb comes from.
And I think it's not in the original sense. It's not derogatory. It just simply means.
No, it's just a characterization of like this is the social class that you're in. That's not.
It just means of the people.
Perhaps
really, doesn't
the patricians did mean it in a derogatory way.
Well, they probably did. But I suppose it just means sort of the people, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But obviously, so you have those more influential groups who are starting to sort of collect more wealth and influence and power. They're usually kind of in the upper echelons of either government or military or both. And obviously they're going to be sort of, more and more people in this stage would be enjoying a more luxurious lifestyle. The next kind of factor is that, with more stability brings more opportunities for growth in the sciences, in the arts, literature, philosophy, lots of those other kinds of important aspects of a society. So a bit more thinking about kind of what's our purpose, where are we going, what's the meaning of life, all these other good things.
You've got you can sit back and kind of enjoy thinking,
the fruits of your labor,
rather than, as we said before, simply just having to sort of scrabble out an existence. You have now things are working, things are in place, and the basic agriculture is happening. You don't have to you can specialize. You can have farmers who do your agriculture for you. You don't have to be. Not everybody has to be growing their own. Yeah, exactly. It's sort of early kind of proto sort of capitalism, I suppose, in that sense. The division of labor and all that kind of thing. Where you can specialize, and different people can have different professions and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in early, in the pioneer phase, everybody's just got a market.
It's all survival.
Your entire sort of mental energy mental and physical energy is going to just simply surviving. Whether it's fighting off indigenous people who you've pissed off by by sort of claiming their land, or just the weather, or just fighting the horrible climate. Like, the Pilgrims again in America had everything at once. They had awful weather, droughts, blights on the crops. Just everything was going wrong for them at every possible stage. Disease, and the rest of it. But anyway, we're past that. We're in the affluent phase. Everybody is.
Yeah, we're in the age of affluence now. We're not thinking about.
Sorry, I don't know why I'm obsessed with the grim.
3 generations.
I don't know why I keep harking back to the grim beginnings. But
it's very very British to be like wanting to suffer.
Just focusing on the bad weather. Maybe that's the British. That's the
literally. But I'm sure they did that back then as well.
Yeah, they probably did actually. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, well, quite.
But so obviously, so to sort of round off the age of affluence, we're getting to the cultural peak, so to speak. So looking at more prosperity, more kind of focus on more academic pursuits, and the society is a lot more organized. And that brings us on to the age of intellect.
Oh, sorry, I'll just segue us into that.
Yeah, you jump in first. You jump in.
It mirrors that thing of, and then what I'm seeing so far in what you're giving me with these stages is it totally mirrors the microcosm of a particular family or an individual, where the sort of grandfather of this family is the one who went out and made his fortune and sort of, whether he was a sort of pirate or whatever his thing is, he makes his money. He has the kind of tough existence. Then you've got the next generation can kind of consolidate whatever sort of business interests he's started, so then out of that comes, once you build up a certain amount of money and a certain amount of land, all the rest of it, out of that comes the possibility of entering the ranks of the nobility, of the aristocracy. And then you get the sort of middle class, or rather, if you don't go that far, you've got that kind of the middle class professions era of lawyers and bankers and doctors and all that kind of stuff, and then eventually you get to what we're about to get onto, which is the intellectual side, where you have the children of the sort of middle classes who have done well are able to fully indulge in art, music, literature, and if not done prudently, that can lead to decadence and the kind of fall of a family. So that Thomas Mann's the great novel Buddenbrooks is all about that in one particular family in the north of Germany, and it sort of focuses in on that sort of decadent phase. But anyway, we're getting there. But it's interesting to me that you've got that what you can see in one family is the story of so many families. That kind of rise and fall is totally mirrored. That arc is totally mirrored on a macro level with Empire.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But anyway, let's get on to the Age of Intellect.
Yeah, well, just gonna blast through these last couple, and then we can reflect properly. So move on to the Age of Intellect. So this is kind of like following on from the Age of Affluence, where we're getting more thriving of intellectualism, more debate, more kind of academic pursuit happening in society. There's also a more clear divide between the kind of the more elite factions of that society and the regular kind of man in the street, where the elite's more focused on kind of rationalism, more kind of bureaucracy, trying to make everything run smooth, and trying to be a bit more, maybe perhaps more pragmatic, although I'm not entirely sure that's the word I would use for it. Whereas you then have the man on the street being more kind of focused on tradition and being against the erasure of long held traditions in that society.
And much more.
Sure we'll cover a few examples.
The man on the street remains rooted in. He's a couple of stages back. He's still in sort of commerce. Whereas the sort of the middle classes are progressed to intellect, so there becomes a sort of this funny divide where the two, and often you actually find the upper class, especially in the British example, the upper classes often find themselves having more in common with the working classes than they do with the middle classes, because that you have this focus on kind of feudalism, tenant farmers, and on landed estates that the gentry own and all. Whereas the middle classes are kind of hiving themselves off into this more sort of intellectual world. So you do get that divide. I think you get it really starkly in the British example.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there'll be some good points we can touch on.
And just that sort of that's why I think often the working class and the middle classes struggle to kind of speak to each other, because they are essentially in two different phases within their own world. The working class is very much rooted in every day it's work. It's simply, again, putting bread on the table. Whereas the middle classes can recede into a slightly more sort of pampered, not necessarily pampered, but more kind of comfortable existence, and sort of ponder. They can start to think and to ponder things, which is a great luxury that the sort of working classes don't have.
We'll revisit this point, because I think there's quite a lot of complexity to that argument, and I think there's some other kind of points to go through on that one, in terms of maybe there's an argument to be made that in these 7 stages of empire, it is very much a kind of simplified version of reality, where we're really trying to categorize things into very specific boxes. But there's also the argument to be made that different classes of people in different empires, everyone's situation is completely different and individual, but there's an argument to be made that some factions or groups of people in these different empires even skip a few stages. That there's the your ruling class, which may well go through every single stage, and they'll reach the heights of wealth a lot sooner. But then for the lower class, do they ever reach the stage of wealth? Do they ever reach the stage where they can be decadent? Quite. And that obviously is also what I think is a contributing factor to what we'll cover in a second, which is kind of the decline of the empire. So obviously, we've covered the age of intellect, so it's obviously a lot more kind of, we've talked a bit more about what that entails. And one interesting way, I actually noted it down, because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to articulate it off the top of my head, but what I did note from reading about this stage is that this stage can be both the height of a culture and a seed of decline. And I think that definitely touches on what we've just been talking about, because
it loses touch with reality, in the sense of if you recede too much into the intellectual, if you kind of philosophize beyond. I mean, there's lots of great philosophy that is rooted in experience and everyday stuff. But if your culture begins to kind of philosophize too much, it loses itself. It loses its and that's to do with the land, I think, as well. The land plays a big part in this. And again, that's kind of what I was trying to get at slightly clumsily before. Is the the upper class, especially in the British example, and it doesn't always apply, but the upper classes and the working classes have this kind of connection to the land. And to the kind of rhythm of everyday life, in terms of farming and all the rest of it, and in terms of the sort of the base stuff that produces the things that the middle classes rely on, so food, that everybody relies on, but they've lost a sense of, because they don't have anything to do with how that's made, they lose a sense of where they come from, where they are, and they can become sort of rootless and a bit lost. And I think, as you say, this is when decadence sets in, when there's a kind of gnawing sense of uncertainty about who you are as a people, because you're not connecting. You're not sort of touching grass, literally. I mean, you're not kind of connected to you're not connected to the earth anymore. You're in this, like with the Romans, the classic image is the sort of, the lounging in, draped in beautiful purple garments that would have, purple being a very expensive dye and a kind of signal of aristocracy. and eating grapes and being having waved with a palm frond and all this kind of stuff. And you look at a scene like that and drinking themselves into oblivion, and you look at that sort of classic sort of stereotype scene, and you think, okay, this is a people that have a portion of a people who have completely lost themselves and don't really know where they're going or where they're coming from.
I do have to say I love that we've diagnosed the problem of late stage empire is they just need to touch grass.
Yeah, basically, just touch some grass.
I think it's I think that
there's
I
a
think
reason.
that might be
There's
the
a
most
reason that
important
phrase
message
is
that we can take from this whole episode.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we should title it that: touching grass.
We all just need to. I mean, basically, what we need to do to avoid like the fall of our society as an entity, we just all need to collectively touch grass.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the answer. We've solved society.
There you go. There you go, Rachel Reeves.
And that was an unintended consequence of this podcast, but we seem to have got there anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah. So yeah, just to speed through these last couple ones, just so we can have a bit of a wider discussion on it.
Let's get to the good stuff.
Yeah,
Decadence,
so now this is the juicy stuff. This is the
debauchery.
stuff that you guys were all here for.
Yeah.
Is the decline. So yeah, obviously we've kind of mentioned the age of decadence a couple times already in this episode, but the age of decadence, to just summarize it, it's complacency on a societal level. So obviously we're going to start with rising inequality through the hoarding of wealth, the consolidation of political power, military power, that causes quite a lot of rifts within society. So there's lots of inequality. Wealth is very much concentrated towards the upper class of society. There's typically pressures on an empire in late stage empire from unsustainable territorial expansion.
Yeah, the barbarians at the gates.
Rome is the prime example of that. And obviously, there's this kind of need to expand for either resources or for a cultural win with your own people. Just be like, we are still good at this stuff. We can still retain that warrior spirit that we had in the early days, just to almost convince themselves as an empire that they still got it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's obviously
the image. It's sort of the image of like in Gladiator. What's his face? The Joaquin Phoenix character, who historically has never been gotten right in any of these films. What's he called? But anyway, it's the sort of preening.
We'll flash it up on screen.
Yeah, exactly. He is the sort of preening. Again, he's the son of Aurelius, who
was entitled.
Yeah,
it's entitled.
And Aurelius is he touched grass. He did his military service and but also was able to philosophize famously, and his meditations and all the rest of it.
Very good book, by the way.
You can tell me more about it at some point, but God, I'm just really trying to remember his name. Anyway, it's not coming to me. But it's that the image of decadence is the sort of preening, pampered son who has not been allowed, has not been schooled in life by his father, but has simply been given everything on a platter and doesn't and doesn't understand and wants to command respect, but doesn't know how to because he doesn't have the tools to gain the respect of the army or the rest of it. Because he's never done his
worldview.
Yeah, he's never done his service. He hasn't put the work in. So why would the soldiers respect him? And it's that whole thing of and you get it a little bit in to go way off planet. Literally, Dune 2. The Harkonnen, the Austin Butler character. He's a bit like that, and he has that moment where, he has this whole staged scene where he's in the gladiatorial ring, very much like this guy I can't remember the name of for the life of me, where he's given sort of lame, drugged warriors who he can sort of, he can fancily sort of prance about and
he can stroke his own ego by beating people.
And there's a moment in Dune 2 where the Baron Harkonnen wants to test him and gives him an undrugged warrior as a way of saying, you've actually got to prove yourself to me here. Sonny Jim. We're not just gonna, I'm not just gonna carry on
Yeah.
forever. And if you survive this, then there you go. There's some respect for you, and he does, of course, and it does him very well.
Yeah, no, of course.
But anyway, that's
just
for me. That's the kind of image of decadence, is the sort of rootlessness, the lack of experience, the lack of putting in the graft in life to get you to where you, and just jumping over and then going, oh, what do I do? I don't know, because I've not sort of put the work in, and that's where everything goes wrong for us, for both on an individual level and then also on a societal level.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, just a couple of other bits before we move on to the final and terminal stage. So other sort of symptoms of the age of decadence would be kind of, a more aversion to the military from the general citizenry. So obviously, war is more increasingly seen as a very pointless endeavor. There's so much more lived experience of veterans from previous wars who have told their family and their descendants how awful it is, the horrors that they've seen, the things they've experienced, and that collective experience is just, no one wants to fight anymore, because quite frankly, they've got bigger problems to think about. They've got more. They're just we're almost back to the survival stage for the kind of the lower classes in the society at this stage.
It's that thing from Thucydides, isn't it? That kind of weariness of war. It may be Thucydides or Herodotus. You can probably tell me. In peacetime, he says, in peacetime, sons bury their fathers, but in wartime, fathers bury their sons. And it's that kind of poignant, that sort of poignant sense. And the First World War was a big moment in the British context for this, but that sort of disillusionment and saying, or the Vietnam War in America, of saying, why on earth are we fighting for this mad project? What is it achieving? Why are we doing this?
I think it's the question that's always asked is like, I mean, again, this is a big tangent. We're not going to spend time on this one today, but it's this notion of like, it's never the old politicians fighting these wars that they start. It's just
interestingly,
send off younger people to go and
that's the sort of lions led by donkeys thing, isn't it? That Alan Clark famously came up with in the 90s. I'm not quite sure when he read that book, but interestingly, there is a kind of correction to that, in that the officer class in the First World War was exclusively made up of upper class of the sort of public school boys, because of how the hierarchy of how the regiments work. And they would often go over
their influence in their stage.
They didn't
have to be with like the grunts almost.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is they're in those regiments. They're at the front. They're the ones leading their men over the top, often with nothing more than a shooting stick. Often, a lot of them went in without even a gun. So they're just going, charge, and they're the very first one over the parapet. So the upper classes actually lost proportionately a greater number than anybody else from their ranks, simply because of this strange kind of deeply sort of classist hierarchical structure, whereby the sons of the great kind of aristocratic families were the ones at the front as the officers. So there is that sort of myth that it's and it's not a myth completely. I mean that obviously there were stupid generals.
I think it changes
stupid generals in their sort of foxholes sending other people out to die. And the Somme is a classic example of that. But I think there is a healthy corrective.
That notion tends to be. That notion is much clearer from kind of World War II onwards, because warfare changes, and after World War One, that's probably maybe the last instance where you have that style of warfare,
the kind of meat grinder.
But from there onwards, it is just your regular dude just getting sent to die, pretty much.
It's true. I don't know. I don't know much about the sort of composition in the Second World War of as you say, it may no longer be the paradigm at that point.
Well, I guess I think of it this way: is
Might
that
be
World
more
War
and more
One
of a
is kind of the last
professionalised,
instance
more
of
of a
like an
professionalised
it's the last notion of an honourable war,
Yeah,
because
I guess so. Yeah,
World War
because-
Two changes the dynamic completely.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a
And
huge
it's much
tangent.
more.
We cannot spend
It's
time
much
on
more
this
of an
one today.
existential war for us, the British.
Yeah,
in a way that
there's
the
so
First
many,
World
there's
War
so many
wasn't really.
factors, and there's so many factors, and we have covered World War Two in a few other episodes, so we will definitely save this one for another time, because otherwise we will be bogged down in this topic forever, because there's so much to cover.
Don't mention
But
the
yeah,
war.
so so we've towards the end of the Age of Decadence, there's also kind of a decline in birth rates. There's also a lot of political polarization, and short-termism is also quite endemic of this stage as well. So again, we're going back, like I mentioned, we're sort of going back to, the majority of people in the society reverting to survival. We're kind of leaving that age of affluence, that age of kind of everyone, there being enough for everybody and all these other kinds of things. And short-termism reigns because people don't have the luxury of being able to think in the long term when they're just trying to survive. So, it gets quite difficult. But then,
and that's an interesting parallel there, isn't there, from the early, you got the pioneer at the one end and the decline and collapse at the other, of that same thing of like, everything's crumbling and on that end, but then previous, you've got that scrabble to simply survive in building everything, and then at the same time, as everything collapses, you've got that scrabble to survive. So there's that sort of mirror image. If sort of affluence is up there at the peak, you've got that same thing at either end of the spectrum.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that's
why
it is
you get the cycle.
The parallels.
You get the cycle of empire because you end up kind
it's
of where
cycle,
you end up sort of where you started.
Yeah, and that's kind of the tragic irony in all of this, really. Because,
and then some other force will break in, establish itself as the new empire, and the whole cycle will kind of repeat itself.
But the thing is, it goes to show it's like nothing lasts forever, and I think you could almost even say that like the fact that so many empires from history have all ended up the same way.
Yeah.
You could say that it's like maybe it's just an inability to learn from the past. And I would say that, I mean, again, we're getting very, very deep and existential, but I would say that's also a lesson that we as a modern society haven't learned.
Well, again, I think
multiple reasons.
I've mentioned it before, I think, but not to sort of labour the point, but the Francis Fukuyama thing of, he had projected this Hegelian image of sort of Martin Luther King, that the arc of history bends towards justice. This idea that as you progress as a society, it all leads in a positive direction towards liberal democracy. When of course we realise this is not. We realise, in the moment, in the sort of populist, the big sort of populist moment in 2016, that we're sort of still in. We realise that's very much not the case. Human nature, just as on an individual thing, human nature is that Thomas Hobbes thing. Life is nasty, brutish, and short. It's that on a grand scale. We're fooling ourselves if we think that through enlightenment we somehow are only on one upward trajectory. We're absolutely not. Again, it's the cyclical thing of empire as well. It's the same thing whether you're in empire or not in empire.
There's parallels to be taken, but I definitely think that there's a lot of caveats for the modern day that haven't been applicable in the past, like the impact of technology. There's also different problems that we just haven't encountered as a society before.
Well, like globalization is a huge one, isn't it? Like,
well, there's that global
when you get a
pandemic.
pandemic,
Like, there's lots of different factors.
Like when you get a pandemic, I mean, in a globalized world, it's fatal.
There's lots of different factors, and I'm sure it'd be interesting for us to cover kind of like the modern day and parallels of history, because I guess like part of us trying to have a podcast on changing the record a bit, and giving people more information, which then might impact your perception of how you view the world and the different things. Like, there's so much, so many lessons from history that, because we're not taught the full picture necessarily, it makes it hard to form an opinion on a lot of things. And when you start learning about a lot of stuff from history, I mean, obviously we've both found this separately from learning more about history ourselves, but you learn more about things that happened in the past and the events that led up to them and the things that it impacted after the fact. And you might come away from it seeing a war in particular a completely different way. And there's also certain figures in history that we're taught about maybe in a certain way or as from a certain perspective, but then from a different perspective it's a completely different experience from someone else's point of view. So I think there's a lot to be said about the modern day and kind of parallels with history, but again, that's a big old topic.
And that plays into the recent rise of what's called global history, which is an attempt to get away from kind of Eurocentric narratives of history that would place Europe as the sort of center of everything, when of course Europe was in a totally sort of barbaric state at a time when others, Islamic civilization and Chinese civilization and all the rest of it were flourishing. So you want to get away from this sense that Europe is sort of the be all and end all, and everything else is peripheral and can only be seen through European eyes. Of course, it's useful to see other cultures through European eyes, through the records of travellers and all the rest of it. But is it Diaz in New? Is it called something? The Conquest of New Spain. Anyway, that those sorts of having a pair of eyes on the ground as this all happens is obviously a useful thing to have historically, but it runs the risk of not seeing things from other perspectives. And of course, we would be foolish if we thought that European civilization was sort of uniquely grand or fantastic when you look at historically.
Actually, I think any civilization.
It took us an awful lot of time because of geography as well. Geography was a big part of it. I'm reading Paul Kennedy's The Rise and what's it called? The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. And he talks about Europe. That unlike Asia, which is like one big sort of expanse that the Mongols could sort of ride over, Europe's broken up by mountains and rivers and all sorts, and it's quite difficult for one power to just sweep through and conquer. So you end up with all these funny little sort of principalities, and so Europe is in quite a sort of it's unable to develop one big massive civilization because it's sort of fragmented in that way. But anyway, that's a whole sort of another topic. But this is probably a good sort of place to wrap this episode on the seven stages. Unless you've got anything else you want to add to it.
Well, we've missed one stage.
Have we? I thought we did it.
Yeah.
Oh, what, decline collapse?
We've got the declining.
Oh, I thought we'd sort of. Collapse. Well, we were sort of getting into it, weren't we? But yeah, go on. Give us the proper official.
We're not done yet. We've got a little bit more.
Go on then.
We've got to finish this off. Tell me about the declining collapse. Final stage. End game of an empire. So obviously this is the point of we're already past the point of no return. So we're looking at economic weakness, lots of problems with the economy, whether that's with commerce, with trade, domestic policy, taxes, anything. We then have kind of, with the loss in economic influence, you have the loss of military influence. You don't have the economy to back up your military anymore. You can't pay your soldiers. You can't, afford to exert, to project.
Because all of your money is going to maintaining
whatever's left.
There's no money going into actual sort of capital growth in industry. So, and of course that's what then pays for a military. And so if you're no longer investing the money where you should be to make them to produce more money that pays for a military, and you're forced by the fact of having more and more enemies because you've grown too big for your boots, you end up in a downward spiral because there's no kind of engine of industry driving your military and feeding them and arming them, because you're just having to just throw everything at the wall to keep the military going. and it's a bit like the Confederacy. Yeah. The Confederacy at the end of the Civil War in America. Sorry to always bring it back to that. They had a sort of decadent, you could say, phase at the end where the Home Guard were just stealing from. So the Home Guard were, not to take this too far, to not get too distracted by this, but the Home Guard were basically the sort of local. One big family in each town would just sort of police the local area, and they were the only men that were allowed not to go and fight at the front, because they were ensuring that, they could requisition things for the troops. But of course, towards the end of the war, when things got really desperate, they would just come and, rather than taking sort of one pig out of 5, or whatever your required amount was that you had to provide, they would just take everything. And so you ended up with farms that were unable to function because they were just being sort of asset stripped, basically, by the Home Guard to send everything to the front, which meant that the families starved. They couldn't grow anything, and so you weren't able to. This side just completely collapsed, and there was no, in the desperation to just feed a sort of dying military force. There was nothing producing the stuff that would then ultimately keep it going in the long run. So there's a sort of microcosm of that wider problem. Mm-hmm. Anyway, sorry,
yeah, because I think also the other thing to consider is it's not also that's a factor, but also there's no money, because there's also most likely rampant corruption in the higher levels of government at this stage as well. So
that's true.
There's like a rising corruption from the previous couple of stages, but obviously this has now gotten to a point where, think of late stage Soviet Union, where bribery is just rampant. There's no money for anything. Like every level of bureaucracy is taking bribes just to do their job, pretty much. Yeah. So it's impossible.
In a supposedly communist society, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's a very interesting and complex kind of downfall, really, because, I mean, again, it's a whole episode on itself for looking at the Soviet Union, but like, it is a complete mess pretty much by the end. So, we'll cover that in a separate time. But yeah, just to wrap this one up, I mean, just to wrap this one up, obviously this is now the breakdown of society. So you're getting, either invaded by external and other empires or kind of fringe groups. You just think of like the Romans getting attacked by the Goths and the Gauls. Not Goths in the way that you think they are, but it's like the old
my
Valentine
comes riding in, yeah.
But yeah, so obviously, this is the breakdown of society, and we bring ourselves to kind of the end of the empire. So after obviously an empire collapses, it leaves a power vacuum, and as we know, power vacuums will give way to someone else stepping in and taking things in their own direction. So when an empire breaks up and fragments, typically, either gets absorbed by another bigger power that's rising up and going into that first stage of empire, or those little fragments will go their own ways. I mean, the best example of that one is probably Alexander's empire, which obviously after Alexander the Great passed away, his empire just fragmented amongst his generals, and you have you have the kind of the Macedonian royalty fighting over Macedon at home.
Got Ptolemy in Egypt.
Ptolemy taking over in Egypt.
Dynasty of which Cleopatra was one of the later. Science.
Yeah, and then you have their rising kind of rivalry with the Seleucids as well. Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of different rivalries that then are spawned from that. So I think that's an interesting kind of end to that.
Yeah. To go back to the you very diplomatically put it that Alexander passed away, but obviously the sort of rumor, the theory. I mean, it's possible he died of some disease, isn't it? That was not very unglamorous.
Well, it was the theory is that he was
murdered by his generals, who were just fed up with this constant expansion, and they said, "Look, we've done it. We're tired. We want to go home. We don't need another bloody civilization to put under our belt. We just want to go. We just want to go and see our wives and our kids and get on with life."
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, I did quite a lot of research on Alexander the Great when I did some study on that at high school, and
reenacted it all.
I remember vividly. Kind of, we studied his life to death, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like, but obviously he had a lot of rifts with his generals. I mean, again, I'm going to try and sum this up real quick. But throughout his conquest, I mean, it started off as let's just go beat up the Persians because they keep on picking on us as Greeks. He squashed the Persians, keeps on going. He develops a much more of a kind of fondness for Persian culture, for the people, as he's moving along, and he's constantly driven by this pursuit of wanting to expand further and further and see what's out there.
Yeah.
And he does have rifts with his generals of them wanting to go home. It's like, we achieved our goal, we beat the Persians. Why are we still going?
Yeah.
But the kind of, I wouldn't say verified, because can you even verify ancient history? But the most kind of widely documented reason for his death was obviously in the Indian campaign. Was that he was hit by an arrow. He was wounded. Obviously, thought nothing of it. But then, as was pretty common back in those times, you could just pick up an infection of some kind and just die. And as much as I think sometimes with grand figures in history, it's tempting to kind of think about it in a very dramatic sense and think about it in like a very dramatized way. Sometimes it's just as simple as people were just very vulnerable back then, like very susceptible to disease. There's no medicine, pretty much. Like it's just hope and a prayer, pretty much.
Diarrhea was once a fatal condition, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's interesting to think. It's interesting the way we look at these things.
When you have that first moment of realizing, you think, "Oh, I better get my affairs in order," because
exactly.
That's the end of you.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of that. But just to end off on this
scatological notes, yeah.
Yeah, well, because to kind of end off on this one, one of the questions that I asked myself while I was doing the research on this topic was, obviously it's so well documented that we've got all these stages of empire, but the question is, can it be avoided? Because you look at these examples and they play out time and time again. You see it with the Roman Empire, the British Empire. You can see it with all the different kinds of historical empires throughout history, and they all seem to go the same way. And having more of a think about this, obviously I'm more than open. People, please, let us know what you think and everything. It's always good to have a discussion on these things. But like, I would say yes and no, because I'll come to your thoughts in a second, Harley. But I've always thought about it as like, we can look at history and we can take all these lessons and we can be like, oh well, the Romans did this, so we shouldn't do that. But in the heat of the moment, things never play out that way. And
no.
As much as it's like, it seems easy for us to look at, say, like the end of the British Empire and think, oh well, America will maybe look at that and be like, well, that could never be us. We would never do that. And it's not that simple, because to avoid that decline and the sort of descent from decadence into collapse, like a country or an empire, whatever, it needs to be self-aware enough to recognize when it's on that path already. And I think it's so difficult on a societal level. That can be hard
to see, yeah.
Yeah, because when you think about it on a societal level, especially in this, using like modern day Britain as an example, right? There's like how like 60 something million people in the UK. Is there ever anything where everyone can unite and agree on one thing? Like, it's impossible to have that kind of clarity as a society to make that happen.
And there may be a
without
more simple,
self-awareness, there's no growth.
Yeah, there may be an even simpler thing, which is that nothing, as you say, nothing lasts forever. To quote the great...
Well, nothing lasts forever, but at the same time, when we look at these things and we see that humanity over the course of thousands of years is making the same mistakes over and over and over again, is it not to say that if there was an empire that could somehow, take that next step and not fall to that same stage of collapse, that, there's a different cycle that could be built on top of that. And it's incredible to kind of theorize about these things. And we've already kind of said that we want to have a look at some alternate history scenarios in the future as well that we can discuss, because I think that's quite fun. But when we look at these things, like, you know, a lot of empires in history aren't self-aware. They kind of think, cool, we're going to conquer. We're better than everybody, and then
they get drunk. They get sort of punch drunk. Yeah, they
and the decadence is hard to avoid because when you have so long at the top. Yeah. And you're unchallenged, it's natural that you're going to get complacent.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you'll think, we've done our hard yards, we've done our work already, we've earned this. And the simple notion of like another power rising up to take your place, it doesn't seem conceivable at the time, but it happens time and time again. So I do think it's, you know, it's interesting to sort of theorize about that, but we look at this cycle and it seems to be almost like it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy a lot of the time, because no one's self-aware enough to actually realize when they're on the decline.
And there is that kind of mysterious, there is that sense that there's something mysterious that just happens in life is cyclical. Things, there's sometimes because different empires fall for different reasons, but they all fall. So there's some kind of mysterious something that just says, okay, you've had your time now in the sun. It's time to go. To end on a quote by the great philosopher Nelly Furtado, why must all good things come to an end? Flames to dust, lovers to friends. There you have it, folks.
Beautifully put. I couldn't have ended
a toast to Miss Furtado and her wonderful
the true
body
philosopher
of work.
Of our time.
The true philosopher of our time, indeed. Yeah, to a promiscuous girl.
To a promiscuous girl.
There we go. What more fitting end could we?
That's a fitting end. I mean, obviously, we've managed to extend our time into a slightly longer episode this time. I think we've finally figured out the tech aspect of
like the Roman Empire. We've overextended ourselves, and we're in the decadent phase of this episode, and
we're in the decadent phase of.
We need to precipitate. We need to precipitate the collapse and say goodbye to our listeners, I think.
Yeah, that sounds good. But yeah,
it's been good fun.
It's been a fun episode.
Yeah, indeed.
I think there's the direction we kind of want to take this podcast more in is us kind of, you know, discussing. We have a kind of premise of the episode or a topic that we want to cover, but it's mainly going to be kind of us talking to each other about it rather than kind of spitting out facts the whole time, because obviously, you know, we want to make it interesting, we want to make it fun, we want to make it an engaging experience that really gets people back into history again. So indeed, that's the idea. Yeah, we're constantly changing. We're evolving like the Roman Empire,
like an empire.
Yeah,
we're coming out of
without the collapse.
We're now coming out of the age of pioneering from our first few early episodes, and we're well on the way to conquest.
We're going to get on the conquest wagon pretty quick, to be honest. Yeah. But yes, thank you very much for listening.
Of thumbnails and Instagram and all the rest of it.
Lots of those. There'll be some. We're working on some good thumbnails to put on some of these episodes on YouTube. So yes, we're still getting started. But yeah, more to come.
Good.
But yeah.
Well, bring on the Age of Affluence. That's what I say. Let's get some sponsors.
Yeah, Age of Affluence. And on that note, thank you for listening. And we'll catch you in the next one.
Cheers.
It's definitely rewired part of my understanding on kind of the latter stages of the Roman Empire and kind of how Rome operated. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest, where the Romans famously lost 3 legions.
Quintilius Varus, where are my legions?
The price of grain would double every 50 miles if you tried to trade it within the Roman Empire. How do you get vast amounts of resources to these soldiers? You buy them locally. So it got to it. Yeah, literally, buy local.
Although you could say that the Germanic tribes have more of a reason to fight, the Roman soldiers are pretty sturdy and they know what they're there to do.
I mean, at the end of the day, those Roman soldiers knew that they were getting a nice little slice of Yorkshire after they finished. So,
well, quite. Palestine comes from Philistine, which was the enemy of the Jews, and so Rome's final kind of slap in the face to the Jews was when expelling them was to call that region.